You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty, and coming up this hour, you will hear a discussion about the vital role that your community plays in responding to hurricanes. We're here at the Palladium Side Door Cabaret in St. Petersburg. So first, a welcome to our wonderful audience here at the cabaret. And I want to introduce the guests. With me on stage, we have Mary Burrell, who is the Whole Community Program Lead with Pinellas County Emergency Management. Mary, thank you so much. Also joined by Thomas Mance, the President and CEO of Feeding Tampa Bay. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you.
Charles Gallagher, an attorney with Gallagher and Associates in St. Petersburg. Charles, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And at the table with me, I have another Matt Thorne, who lives in the Shore Acres neighborhood in St. Petersburg and who created a relief market and grill for his neighbors after Hurricane Helene flooded his home. So thank you all for taking the time to be with us this evening. Now, when you're facing a crisis, that's when you really find out who you can count on. And when you're dealing with the aftermath of a hurricane, knowing who your neighbors are and having a good support network can make a huge difference in how you get through the crisis. And this isn't just a one-way street, so helping your friends and neighbors can help you too. Hurricane season starts in just a few weeks, and we're going to talk about all of this, and we'll take a few questions from the audience too. Mary, I want to start with you. You work for Pinellas County and you work with the Pinellas County Emergency Management Division. Just explain your role as a whole community program lead. How does it connect residents like many of the folks sitting here tonight?
Well, the program name of Whole Community is a FEMA concept that really just puts a name on what we've all been doing for, throughout history. Whole Community is all about matching resources with people that don't have resources. So neighbors helping neighbors and businesses who will, help residents who need something like an Uber ride or something like that. What my program does is identify certain at-risk areas that we know as vulnerable populations, people that are a little harder to connect with. And we're trying to find ways to connect with them so that we could get the resources to them that they need.
And what are some of those vulnerable populations? Like, just give us a couple of examples.
Well, specifically, there's areas where folks are income and transportation challenged, food deserts. Also, folks who are deaf, hard of hearing, who are blind, low vision. English is not their first language at home. The very young, the very old, the homebound. These are the groups that, we just do not connect to easily. We have to find people in those groups that we can work with that will then communicate with them. And that's really the crux of what we try to do.
And so, when there's a disaster, a lot of people may know that, FEMA swoops in. You have state and local government agencies as well, and city and county too. But if you're affected by a storm, it may not be long before you find out that those agencies, there's a limit to what they can do. So at what point is that kind of point at which you say, okay, now community needs to step up and take more of a lead role?
Well, community always has to step up. We agree. Yeah, we can't do it ourselves. We have 15 people in our department for Pinellas County. Of course, you have your own emergency management department in the city, which is like 2 people. We need those community partners all through the year and to help prepare and that. Mm-hmm. But you're right. When the event is upon us and we're in response mode, we do have a lot of help around us. We have Salvation Army that's out in the neighborhoods. The Red Cross is out there. We have a lot of groups that come in from out of the area. Team Rubicon, I heard mentioned. I know Jason, and a lot of the groups are trained in the church groups, and everybody's here. But then, they're all volunteers, and they have to go back. They have to go back to what they're doing. And even FEMA. They go back. We still have some in the area. We do have some representatives working with the folks. But this is kind of, for me, when it's really rough because, people are turning to me in my role, and they're turning to other people. And this is when people are like, they're homeless now, they're near homeless, they don't know what to do. And we just don't have all of those people around us. So this is when we really, really need those, those nonprofits, and they do, and they step up, and everybody does what they can. But we really need everybody working together on this, because otherwise there really are no resources. There aren't enough resources.
Yeah.
There really aren't.
Well, speaking of resources, Thomas, you as at Feeding Tampa Bay, you're serving 100 million meals a year to Metro Tampa Bay, Sarasota areas, but also rural counties like Citrus and Hernando, Hardy and Highland. So you've got a pretty big kind of backyard, I suppose, to feed the folks in. What impact does a hurricane have on your work? Because you're doing this whether there's a hurricane or not, right? That's your job.
Right. Our organization makes sure that in good times, I guess to use a phrase, there's food in areas and homes where those resources don't exist. And so if you were to think about it as a percentage basis, about 20 to 25% of the population of the 10-county area we serve does not have the resources to take care of their obligations, right? So they're already in a deficit situation. When a hurricane happens, any sort of event, our output might go from 250,000 meals a day to 500,000 a day.
How do you ramp up like that? Because that's got to be a challenge.
It is. So when you talk about national and what was just mentioned is important. We're a community-based organization. We're supported by the community. We're a part of the community, and we live here and are here every day. And so while national emergency partners are helpful, the reality is we have 60 trucks on the road every day. We have a 200,000 square foot warehouse, all to make sure that the counties that we serve have the resources that they need. So we actually have already started staging water MREs in our warehouse now. We're prepared ahead of storms to make sure that we have the initial resources necessary.
And just for folks listening, MRE is?
Meals ready to eat. Right. So anybody that is from the military, you remember those tasty items. But the good news is they can survive.
Are they good? Are they tasty?
You become an astronaut,
right?
Just
less fondly, perhaps, but they will survive the apocalypse. But they are safe. They're nutritious, which is important, because one of the things that happens post-storms is access to good, healthy food, nutritious food is compromised. So we make sure that all of those are staged pre-storm, during the storm. We are ready to deliver. And then post-storm, depending on the severity, location, and issues, we are out there providing food. But the answer directly to your question is that we have national and state partners that we locate food from and bring them into this area. So in the last two storms, we brought in the equivalent of about 100 tractor trailer loads of food from outside the state.
Yeah.
Because the resources don't exist inside our state. And so that's our role, to make sure those are there and available.
Charles, you're taking a slightly different perspective, I guess, from some of the other guests here this evening, because you're looking at the sort of legal aspects, but you were pretty busy last hurricane season, right? What are some of the things, legal issues that people might bump into in a hurricane? After a hurricane.
Certainly. The two primary ones would be, if you're living somewhere under a lease, that's the one issue. Do you have rights? What are your rights? Or if you're in a home where you live and you own, you've got insurance, homeowners insurance issues is very concerning as well. How do you interact with adjusters? Trying to share some knowledge with folks that can help them and pass that on to their community as well. So a lot of issues do intersect with contractual issues, legal issues, and in Florida law is a prevailing issue very often.
Yeah. So when you go through that, like, what does a hurricane teach you about the limits of the law and kind of how communities function ideally?
And people will learn about those interactions with FEMA or an adjuster. They'll pass that along to their neighbors and friends. Certain things you want to do in advance. You want to prepare as far as an inventory, walk through your house with a camera, a video. You can do things ahead of time that will help preempt the issues. And then the other issue was, when things happen, what's your plan of attack? What do you do? And so often there are many questions that besiege these folks that are homeowners or tenants, and they're kind of stuck. So, we're always happy to go ahead and in a gratis fashion, interpret those issues with contracts and leases and talk to them and give them some context and some ideas on what their rights are, and try to give them some, on the fly help as they need it.
Is that law, as it pertains to kind of hurricane damage, has that changed much in recent years?
Not in terms of insurance contracts and leases, not so much. there are always some nuanced changes as far as FEMA goes, and certainly this year with the flooding and affecting a whole lot of properties that couldn't be rebuilt, that's definitely a fresh issue for our area. But generally, these are all matters of contract among either a lease or among an insurance policy, so they are fairly longstanding.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so Matt, some people in the audience here in St. Pete may be familiar with your efforts to help out last year after Hurricanes Helene and Milton. For those who aren't familiar, can you just explain a little bit what was the relief market and grill and how did it come into being?
Well, it's technically actually still in existence because I incorporated it as its own nonprofit now. But what it started out as was we stayed during Helene because she was off coast. This was our first hurricane in Florida to a degree, aside from some tropical storms and etc. So we didn't feel like we needed to necessarily evacuate. My home had never flooded before. Mm-hmm. I live in Shore Acres for anybody who wants to know. My home had never flooded before, and I was watching the news, I made the decision that we were going to stay because of all of the background knowledge and what I was watching, and she was off coast and so forth. Wrong decision. So I will preface that to anybody that's sitting in the audience, like when they say to evacuate, yeah, you probably should. And we went through the whole day. There were a few of my neighbors who wanted me. I went over, walked through about roughly about like a foot of water to turn off their electrical, who had evacuated. So I walked over there and so forth, and we went through the whole day. And about 9:30, the community just went like, all of St. Pete just went like blackout. Power went out, and by that point, the water was already up to my front door. And I ended up sitting in 28 inches of water, and I had my my partner and my friend who was staying with us at the time and all of our animals up in the attic. You're not supposed to, but I gave them my axe and my chainsaw. And I said, if it starts getting above my waist.
So you had a menagerie with you?
Uh-huh.
What,
yeah.
So what are we talking about here? Dogs, cats?
I have 3 dogs, my friend's cats, and a hedgehog, actually.
Okay.
No joke. We had a hedgehog. And I got them up in the attic. You're not supposed to do that, especially in a single story. I will preface that. But I gave them my chainsaw, and I gave them my axe, and I said, if it starts getting above my waist, because I was on the ladder at the time, I said, if it starts getting above my waist, you need to start taking out the center beams because it'll weaken the roof. So I grew up on a farm, for anybody who wants to know.
This is kind of like an apocalyptic situation you were facing.
Oh, it got really deep really quick.
So you sort of rode out the night in your flooded house, and then
I ended up with about 30 inches of water,
mm-hmm.
That I was just standing in the entire night. And then what ended up happening, to your question, was I knew that there were other people. I don't want to get emotional about this, but I knew that there were other people who had stayed in the community. And when we decided to ride it out, we had gone and purchased a whole bunch of food.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we had thrown it in the freezer, my chest freezer. And I decided to I just put a post out, and I said, hey, if anybody had stayed and you're able to make it over to my house, I have hamburgers and hot dogs. I literally started the morning boiling a pot of water and hand dripping coffee because our neighbors across the streets, Tyler and Zoe, had stayed as well, and they slept on their counter while we were sleeping in our attic. And the water hadn't even receded at that point.
And you're
so
out
we
there
didn't
grilling.
we didn't even have emergency services coming in at that point. So I had my boots on, and I walked across the street, and I said, here's a cup of coffee. I was just like, I'm going to make some breakfast. And that's kind of how it started. And we didn't have, at least in Shore Acres at that particular point, like emergency services didn't even come in until like 3 or 4 o'clock that day, the day after. I think it was the 26th. And so we didn't even have anybody coming in at that point. So I was just like, if you can walk over, if you need something to eat, if you need something, because all of my stuff I had elevated, and it wasn't in floodwater. And that's kind of like how it started. And then we just needed a centralized point. And then I ended up serving about 6 communities in St. Petersburg and 28,000 meals later. And that's kind of where it started.
You probably didn't kind of have it in mind that you were going to be doing this for so long, right? As dawn broke the day after.
No, I wanted to make sure that people had a meal and they were taken care of. And I love our community. That's why we moved to St. Pete in the first place. And I just wanted to make sure that, the people who were there, who were being affected by all of this, because we were being affected by all of it, were just being taken care of.
We're going to talk more about what happened to Matt and other folks in the community. You are listening to Florida Matters, and we're recording this in front of a live audience at the Palladium Side Door Cabaret in St. Petersburg. We're talking about the ways communities can come together before, during, and especially after a hurricane. Coming up, more about the lessons learned from Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, and Milton. You're listening to WUSF Tampa, and this is Florida Matters, recorded in front of a live audience at the Palladium Side Door Cabaret in St. Petersburg. I'm Matthew Petty. Let's get back to the conversation about how the community responds to a hurricane or other natural disasters. You're hearing from Mary Burrell with Pinellas County Emergency Management, Thomas Mance with Feeding Tampa Bay, attorney Charles Gallagher, and St. Pete resident Matt Thorne. He organized a homegrown relief effort for his Shore Acres neighbors during last year's hurricanes. We are going to take some questions from the audience soon, but first, a look back at the 2024 hurricane season and the trifecta of storms, Debbie, Helene, and Milton. So, Matt, just a moment ago, we were talking about kind of the immediate impact of Hurricane Helene, the flooding, how it sort of upended your house and your community and got you started in this relief effort. But I wanted to ask you about the things kind of after those practical things. So what about the psychological impact, and how do you work through that?
I think that that's a long-term process. I mean, for me personally, I still go through ups and downs when it comes to that. In my moment, in that particular instance, it was a survival moment. So it was making sure that everybody in my household, including our animals, were taken care of. Like that was the immediate instinct. And I think as you go through the months afterwards, I started the Relief Marketing Grill and was helping the community. And that kind of took a certain level of effort and kind of helped me kind of like heal in certain aspects. But like it takes a toll on you. I mean, we're 7 months out at this point. Like I'm still waiting on certain things from FEMA. I'm still waiting on certain things from insurance. But I'm also grateful for the fact that like when I did do the Relief Marketing Grill, like I had like, Thomas and Feeding Tampa Bay, who was, helping out. And I had, certain aspects of the city in Pinellas County that were also helping us out. It does become a community effort, and it becomes a thing that you have to kind of put together. Mm-hmm. But from a psychological perspective, I think that trauma is something that you're constantly gonna keep going through. I have moments that I'm really great, and I have moments that I'm not great because of what you're going through.
Indeed. Well, Thomas, one hurricane is bad enough. How did Feeding Tampa Bay respond to 3 last year? And when you think about your preparation, was it enough in retrospect?
Well, I think it's always important for communities to understand, Mary said this earlier, there's never enough resource. You're really triaging significant damage as you make your way through, and you're trying to, again, as Mary said, I think thoughtfully, there are communities that are more vulnerable than others. And so she mentioned those specifically, but we also have to understand that communities of color, communities that are economically disadvantaged are disproportionately impacted by storms of this nature. And so we know where those are because we're there already. We have partnerships and supply lines into those places. And so we try and get ready as best we can. The interesting part about the 3 storms, if you think about the latter 2, one was a wind event and one was a water event. Both obviously are both. But the reality is the difference was what happened to dwellings. Obviously, you can run from wind, hide from wind, run from water, but the longer term damage to folks with water has been substantial. We are still supporting families that have come through the hurricanes 8-9 months later, almost 10 months later, I guess. And so I think that's one of the other things we understand about this is in our world, every 1 week of crisis is usually a month of recovery. Right. And so it takes a while for folks that don't necessarily have resources to rebuild. So while we respond pre-hurricane and prepping, mid-hurricane and making sure folks can navigate their way through, post-hurricane, we're rebuilding homes, pantries, bringing resources in. The reality is for most folks, a good 6 months after a storm, you're still trying to figure out how to put your life back together. The average family we serve doesn't have more than $600 in savings. And so the resiliency is not necessarily always there. So I think, your question was very specific, but I think folks need to understand that it is what we view as an emergent event that is time-bound and time-sensitive is not that at all. It creates a downstream impact that takes a while for communities to recover from.
What I'm hearing is some folks are still kind of effectively in crisis.
We have a partnership with Grow Financial right now where we are still doing applications for rebuilding housing, helping with transportation, because the impact, they echo quite a bit.
You mentioned something before the break too. You talked about the number of trucks you have on the road in the kind of regular course of business. But when you're dealing with a disaster like Helene or Milton and you've got kind of infrastructure challenges, how does that change things?
Yeah, so so it's not unusual for us before a hurricane, we will go out and hire temp drivers, we'll lease extra trucks, we'll make sure that we have the resources necessary as we kind of anticipate what impact might be. Whereas size and scope, we generally, as I said, we know where population bases are. So we do have to get prepared. We're always out ahead and we have to be ahead so that we make sure that we have the resources we need. And as I mentioned before, we start bringing in food well before a storm and stage it and make sure. And then the network of food relief organizations in Florida all work with each other and we move food around different spots in the state based on where the hurricane trajectory will be so that we can make sure we're in the right place at the right time.
Mary, when a hurricane hits, a lot of people want to help, right? So when you think back to 2024, what were some of the challenges you faced in connecting volunteers or supplies with people who needed them?
This was Helene, and the hurricane had not even passed by, and I started getting phone calls. So one guy says, "Oh, I have a tractor trailer full of supplies. Everybody needs these." I'm like, "Okay, where are you?" "Oh, I'm down the street, parked in the parking lot." So he was right there, and so we had a group called Capacity Path. I was trying to get out to meet them. They were great with crisis. Yeah, they were trying to go out to areas.
So they're like a kind of a rapid response.
Yeah, it's like a mental health crisis. When I was their liaison, just go off track a little bit, but they'd come back and they'd call me, and just all the pockets, in the county that people weren't even aware of. The people on the 11th floor, they had pictures of the people in the stairwell. They couldn't get down, and just unbelievable. And they were really, really helpful. Not only, because people are just in shock, the anguish, and, I can't believe this. But even just being our eyes out there, and a lot of times the people that we are connected with, our connections, our contacts, they're eyes for us. They're calling, me, and they're saying, "Hey, Mary, there's a neighborhood here. They don't have what they need, and then we had these supplies coming in. So we were able to I kept calling like wheeling and dealing. We were able to route them as they were calling and coming into these places. That was interesting. It was something that I hadn't experienced before. And so now we're planning for that. And now, literally, where are our places? Where are our people? I'm going to add you right in there, just to have this, this network going so that we could do a better job of getting to places.
Now, it's sort of thinking about the longer term recovery, Mary, helping people clean out their homes is a big task too, right? And you do have some folks who can volunteer there. Can you talk a little bit about what a muck and gut crew is and how you coordinate those folks?
Yeah. So we have groups, and they're usually members of what we call VOAD, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. And they're statewide, they're national wide, and we have one in Pinellas County. But they're groups, usually they're church-based, but they don't have to be, or faith-based, and they're trained. They're trained in, in sawing, they're sawyers, and the muck and gut. Muck and gut is when, you go into a home or you do it yourself and you pull everything out. You pull all the wet stuff out, and you, get the drywall down and all of that. It's the real, and most people, I think, just can't do that. Just can't do that themselves. And you have to, as you got to get in there and do it right away. So we have a lot of these teams, and they do the same thing. They stage. I mean, they're very professional, and they come into the area and they do the muck and guts, and they'll also do saw the trees down. They'll feed some of them. They all do, kind of different things like that. So,
Charles, speaking of trees, you personally experienced what a tree can do to a home, right?
We had 2 trees on our roof. Yes. And I think a lot of folks did too. And I think we had so many calls about that. And at the end of the day, it's an act of God. Most insurance policies, most case law regards it as not something that a neighbor whose tree is on their property and falling onto the other neighbor's property is not going to have liability. They're exception. Say if it was a known disease tree and they just ignored getting it cut down, or there's already some kind of a split to the trunk, you might have some scenario then, but yes, there was so much of that, and so much of foreign out of the state vendors coming in to do work, and the parity and the quotes that were given was shocking to the extent that there's some gouging going on there. A range of $2,000 to $40,000 for removing trees, and I found personally that I was better served by a long-standing St. Pete tree company who was fair, did a great job. But I got bids from other folks that were up to $40,000 for 2 trees. So there's a lot of that also with the muck and guts. And we had heard stories early on about people that were charged. They were kind of profiling older folks who had been had some damage, and they were charging $3,000 and $4,000 per room to go ahead and do the pullouts, and that was way above what market was. So it brings out the best and the worst in people, and sadly, a lot of the worst.
Yeah, I mean, what advice can you give people? I mean, it's easy to think about these things logically now when there's not a crisis at hand, but when you're in the heat of the moment and you're facing a disaster, and somebody knocks on your door and says, "I can do this right now." What's your advice?
Yeah, if someone comes to you, they solicit you, independently, probably good to pump the brakes. We had stories of people that had public adjusters coming to their door representing that they were from the insurance carrier, not how public adjusters work. It's a private person you're paying a percent to adjust your claim and help advocate for you. So anybody that comes to your door, whether it be a vendor, whether it be a contractor, whether it be an adjuster, the one person you want to come to your door is an adjuster from your insurance carrier. And it might even be an independent adjuster that they've tasked, but just be very clear on who's coming to your door. Don't sign a thing. Okay, your carrier is not going to ask you to sign anything. They're going to come to your house. They're going to say, "Can we see take some pictures, take some measurements," and they're going to adjust the claim. They're going to scope it. So anyone coming to your door, be very, very cynical. Be very, very careful. It's not the cavalry coming. It's folks are coming to go ahead and do bad things.
Yeah.
So one thing, if I may, Matthew, like just like on like to piggyback on that is like, the one thing I love about St. Petersburg is the civic associations that exist, whether that's Shore Acres or Riviera Bay or Reddington Beach or whatever, are really tight knit communities. Like, talk to your neighbors. If somebody comes to your door to offer a service or whatever, just kind of like trying to like play the system or play us because we're in a situation that's and I think that's the other point to your earlier comment, like the psychological aspect, like you're talking about people who are in a very traumatic event. So it's easy to play them or it's easy to play us. But talk to your civic association, talk to your other neighbors, talk to other people before you actually engage in a contract with something.
So on the neighbor front, I mean, some people may be a little hesitant, I guess, to approach their neighbors in a disaster, right? Did you have a pretty good kind of rapport with your neighbors before the storm season?
Yeah. I mean, like for a few of them, I mean, like some of them after the storm have become like some of my best friends. Mm-hmm. Before I had a rapport with a good chunk of them. Yeah. Not as many obviously as I do now, but I think everybody in the community and surrounding areas know me. But I had my neighbors across the street, like I said, Tyler and Zoe and, my neighbor Rosemary and so forth. But I've gotten to know more of them after.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, I wanted to come back to kind of how you deal with a disaster and the staff you have. I guess it's kind of a logistics question, but you do rely on some volunteers, right? So when a hurricane strikes, your volunteers may be under pressure themselves. How does that affect what you do?
I think one of the nice themes that's running through the conversation is the role of community in situations like this. So we're a volunteer-based organization. We'll have the benefit of probably 60 to 65,000 volunteers a year that support us all year long. And throughout the network that we serve, like just here in Pinellas County, we probably have 90 different nonprofits we work with and through, all of which are volunteer-based. And I think it's one of the great things about who we are as a community is the idea that folks look after each other. But for our teammates, for our community, personal safety and well-being always comes first. So, we prior to, we have conversations with our teammates that say, if you need to go, go. We just need to know if you're going to go, and then we'll work with the ones that stay. And then what often happens with the network of volunteers, and Mary and I were talking about this before the show, is they again have to take care of themselves. So for us, it's all hands on deck. I spent, after both storms, spent a good time out here in Pinellas County, unloading boxes and loading them into cars during the storm, because that's what we need to do in those moments. And then slowly but surely, the community comes back. They start volunteering when their safety is assured. And it's one of the great things that I think all of us get to experience in any place that we are. The funny thing about disasters is you see the absolute worst that can happen and you experience the absolute best of people. And the combination of the two is often, I've been doing this a long time, and it's something that never fails to impress me, is that the kindness and thoughtfulness of a human being who will walk up and say, let me help. What can I do today? Folks calling us saying, hey, I have extra this or that. How can I be of assistance to our community? And so what starts out at a pretty bleak moment for a whole lot of folks, there's a lot of grace that comes behind it that ultimately rebuilds communities.
It can be a long process though, right? I mean, one of my colleagues, Skylar Braun, spoke to some folks who are still kind of, the houses were still flooded like months and months and months after these storms. So that, there is this sort of outpouring of generosity oftentimes in the immediate aftermath, but kind of like managing it through a very long disaster, I'm sure is a challenge.
It is, because the arc of support is generally, heavy on the front end of the storm, whether it's individuals or corporations. We're completely funded by donations, right? So we rely on the community to come in and say, hey, we can support you. We'll supply you the funding necessary to do that. That generally comes all in the front end. And then we work at spending that out over time because we know that the longer recovery or the period of recovery is going to be longer than just the initial week to 2 weeks. Because it's off of the news cycle doesn't mean it's not still happening. And so we try and make sure that we maintain a relationship all the time in the communities. And that's why I mentioned before, while national partners are very helpful, and they are, the reality is most all the work is done by local organizations, communities, and volunteers that live and work every day that really at the end of the day, they're helping a neighbor and a friend. Whether they know them or not, they're helping a neighbor and a friend.
Just because Jim Cantori's not here anymore doesn't mean that it's a problem anymore. Just saying.
Right. Yeah. He's something to keep an eye on, I guess, if you're worried about what's going to happen to your particular neighborhood. We've got about 30 seconds left, but just real quickly, Mary, I mean, you and I were talking a day or two back, and you said that it's not just, the 6 months of hurricane season. It's a year-round job. And just to Thomas's point, you have to kind of keep building those community networks to make sure that people are going to stick around for each other and help each other out beyond the initial impact.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have to be working on this year round. And there are some good things that come out of these things is that, you do bond more with your neighbors. I think, we're closer to our neighbors than we were before. There's a real, renewed sense of like a community where I live. I live in Madeira Beach and, in my son's neighborhood in St. Petersburg too. So, you do get that. You get maybe some more volunteers, the resources are thinner because there's actually more need. It's not like you just go back to normal. Now there's more, but so you always need to be working on it. The job is never done. I mean, even when we don't have hurricanes.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to Florida Matters. We're recording this in front of a live audience at the Palladium Side Door Cabaret in St. Petersburg, talking about the ways communities can come together before, during, and after a hurricane. Coming up, community members in our audience will get to ask some questions. You're listening to Florida Matters, recorded in front of a live audience at the Palladium Side Door Cabaret in St. Petersburg. I'm Matthew Petty. You're hearing from Mary Burrell with Pinellas County Emergency Management, Thomas Mance with Feeding Tampa Bay, Attorney Charles Gallagher, and Shore Acres resident Matt Thorne. We are going to take some questions now from the audience.
My name is Mary Dowd, and my question is, are you familiar with any resources available to guide residents that have experienced water damage to their personal items, such as photographs, important papers, family heirlooms, etc., that could help folks not simply throw them out into a big pile of debris and possibly save them? I know that the Arno River, when it flooded in Florence, Italy back in the 1960s, they put a lot of the important historic papers into deep freeze and later conserved them.
Wow. That's a great question.
Actually, my neighbor did the same thing. She saved all of my photos. She deep freeze them, and then let them once they're frozen, start taking them apart, and then put them between paper towels or some like a cloth that can absorb the frost once you start unfreezing them. But she basically, I think I only lost one photo album because she literally took everything that I had in my garage and froze it and just started peeling them apart. The only thing that you have to worry about is if you have old Polaroids. So the old Polaroids that you would have from like a Kodak or whatever, you have to be careful of the air pocket between them. So once you unfreeze them or start to unfreeze them, if it starts to bubble, you wanna get the moisture out of it as quickly as possible. That's the big thing with, look at that, Hurricane 101. I mean, didn't know anything about that until this last time around, but that's how you can kind of save them. Yes, freeze them immediately, or as quickly as you possibly can, because it
Right.
It takes the decomposition out of it.
Yeah, your freezer may not be working for a few days, though. I wondered too, Mary, I mean, are there some organizations that have kind of reached out to say we can help folks out with this?
There are a lot of organizations, that have resources. A lot of times it's just trying to connect, connect the one to what you need. Like I said earlier, unfortunately, a lot of the organizations with resources don't have a lot of the resources either, as far as trying to help everybody. But yes, and we send people a 211, which, they can refer you to a lot of places. They do have a 211 online, which I find more helpful because then you can kind of just scroll through and, even just email the different organizations and, and there's new programs that, do come online, so it's 211 is probably the best way to see what's there for the most part.
Right.
And then we do have the state and the federal programs that come online on disaster.pinellas.gov. So we try to keep up on that, to help people out.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi there. My name is Adam Peters. I'm a St. Petersburg native and specifically the Oakwood Gardens community, about 4 miles from here. 2023, I created the Community Happiness Project specifically to get our community more creatively engaged. One of the questions that I have is, how are we going to handle the lack of federal funding that will probably be coming our way this next year, as well as the federal funding for NOAA, so that we can be as prepared as possible, and any supply chain disruption because of tariffs, trade wars, et cetera? How are you thinking about that and preparing for the 2025 season?
Thomas, that might be something you have on your mind.
I think we should be concerned. I think from our perspective, we've been asked a lot about what's happening in Washington because it does impact the work that we do. And our posture right now is until something is signed and until budgets are passed, it's probably a bit too soon to react, but it's not too soon to pay attention. I think the signals and signs that we get out of the federal government and the state government are that there is a desire to reduce spending. What we try and point out is the impact of those kinds of decisions on communities, both in the short term and long term. To give you a sense of perspective of that 100 million meals we'll distribute this year, about 20 million of those come through a federal commodities program. And so that could be at risk. And the important part to understand about the way that works is the commodities program is funding that the United States government releases to farmers, basically, for them to grow agricultural crops that we then put into the homes of neighbors in our community who don't always have fresh, healthy food. And so the two groups that are fundamentally impacted by this are our agricultural community, which is an important part of our lives here in Florida, as well as neighbors who don't always have those resources. When you look at potential cuts to other programs that could come, SNAP, which is food stamps, Medicaid, all of these things put tremendous pressure on household budgets, which are already strained. The second part of your question, which is important for us to understand, is relief organizations like ours cannot make up those gaps. We'll do everything that we can, as hard as we can. We'll go as far as everybody in this room takes us. We'll push with every ounce that we have and do whatever we can, but those resources don't exist in our communities. And when they are no longer available, they're going to impact us. Again, I think it's important not to over-catastrophize, because we don't know impact yet. But I do think we as communities should be voicing our concerns to those who are elected to represent us. That's always the best way to have a conversation.
All right.
Hello, my name's Kim Tononi, and mine is kind of I already have what I use at my house, but how many generators are enough?
Wow.
You're never, I have, at this point, I have 4. So
Yes.
there's never going to be enough unless you have unless your house is like on a full, backup generator, system with solar panels and all of that stuff. No, there's never going to be enough. I think I bought 4. I did buy 4. I have 4 in my garage at the moment in time.
On the other hand, you don't have to get real big ones if you
yes,
can't
you don't.
get
Yeah,
them.
no, yeah, you don't. Need,
I have some
like,
people,
yeah.
they'll come to me and they have like a oxygen, concentrator or
Yep.
Z-Pak or something like that, and they don't want to go to a shelter,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, you can get one big enough. If that's your concern, if that's going to, because you need to stay alive.
Yeah, and they don't, and
so
you also don't even need gas. I also want to preface, like, you don't need gas one. Like, I have gas ones, preferably, but that requires obviously gasoline, right? But they make, like, you can order ones on Amazon that are solar powered and so forth that will provide as much, enough power to power whatever like essential things that you might need.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for all coming out. My name is Robert Westerfield. I live at Oak Central Park in St. Pete. Is there any talk about seawalls going into the barrier islands like they do with Japan to stop, tsunamis? Because it seemed like, we can't hide from the wind, but we could fight the water. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's again, this may be a little bit outside the scope of the expertise of the panel, but Mary, I know that some counties are kind of doing some work to sort of see what they can do to make sure that the dunes are protected, and there are other things they're looking at there.
Yeah, different governments looking at different things, even like municipalities, looking to see what they could do. Can they raise the roads? Can they, with the beaches, there was so much work done with the dunes for the beach erosion, and now they're flat. They're like, I was there, 38 years ago, that's what they look like, but maybe that helped protect us a little bit, but they're trying to, get the funding to be able to rebuild those beaches because that's what protects us, and to get the sand dunes. So, and I've heard talk in different municipalities where they're looking at, maybe seawalls, maybe, groins out in the water. They all seem to do, something a little different. I've noticed on the beaches in some areas, the homeowners taking it upon themselves, and I noticed their seawalls that they're rebuilding on the beach side are very tall.
Hi, my name is Rick Zalaki, and actually I'm from Seffner, Florida, across the bay. But believe it or not, we have problems over there too. Not the same as you guys have over here. I'm going to follow her suggestion and offer my second question, which is, what can people do to help facilitate the provision of necessary resources to meet the needs of victims with hurricanes, including determining where or how to volunteer?
All right. Charles, I'm just going to throw this to you because I feel like you need a question.
We saw a lot of examples online on social media, people mobilizing together locally and groups that weren't even, disaster based, and it being a good gatekeeper for disseminating folks other resources. So I think in our world now of social media and online presence, that was an easy way to go ahead and get together. I don't know about anybody in the non-Pinellas area, but cell service was greatly reduced, shockingly reduced after the storms. And you couldn't use a cell phone. Maybe you could go ahead and text someone. Maybe you can go ahead and get online. But the email and the online versions were ways which people that I saw in our circles were able to go ahead and collaborate and join up and begin to help together and get the word out too. So I think that was a safe way and good way to get it out.
Mary.
Yeah, that's a great thing when you can't, there's help to be had. And on that too, if you're looking to say do donation center or something else, if you don't have cell service, you don't have power, whatever, take a little walk around, check with your, your houses of worship in the area, your community centers, because you might have somebody doing it like a block or two away that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can help them. During a disaster, we started a website, and it's on that same. You can find it disaster.pinellas.gov. And it's still on there. There's still organizations there that take volunteers, but we really rev that up, and we'll do it more. That was a good lessons learned for me. So, you can check that at that time. And then year round, and especially in disasters, it's helpful. But the state has, it's called Volunteer Connect. And agencies can go in and put in exactly what volunteers they need. And they can, even if they want to, put dates and times of specific assignments that they're looking for. And so if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity, you can go in there, you sign up, you can look for what area you want, what type of work you want to do. And that's also a very good tool for everyone.
I also want to give like a kudos to like Thomas and Feeding Tampa Bay. Like look at some of the regional organizations too, because they also help filter down into the local organizations that are here. So like, you know, Feeding Tampa Bay is a great organization to kind of be connected to. And then if we need resources as local organizations, that's who we're going to go to for that.
Wonderful.
My name is Tyra of the Rocky Point area in Tampa. What should renters know ahead of the season to protect themselves legally?
That's a good question.
It's a painful exercise, but get your written lease out and read it. And if you don't have it, request it from your landlord. There's going to be a section in there that says something about casualty loss or loss to the property or damage. And generally speaking, a landlord should not ask you to pay if your property is unusable. Now, taking that a little step further, say that half of your property, half of your unit is usable, half is not. A landlord should say, I'm going to go ahead and abate your rent to half, right? If you can use 4 of the rooms, not 8 of the rooms, I'm only going to charge you half. We ran into so many examples of landlords taking the wrong road and requiring full payment and not timely fixing things. There's a separate, under statute, you've got a right as a tenant, okay, to demand a material noncompliance be fixed within 7 days. It's a written document. You can go online, you can find it. It's easy to go ahead and prepare, but put your landlord on notice. They got to fix it in 7 days. Here, you might have a court be a little more sympathetic because there's a hurricane. There's a problem with getting vendors out, but get that lease, have that lease, read that lease. And before a storm hits, figure out what your rights are, what your landlord's obligations are, so that you're already armed with that. So it's a tough thing. And again, if anybody's got questions beyond that, feel free to go ahead and email or call my office. I'm happy to field questions gratis on these things that aren't fielded today.
Like, is it mandatory that they have a catastrophic like clause in their like mine did? So I got out of my lease.
Generally, there's going to be like a force majeure clause. We're saying something happens, like a disaster, you're going to have relief from that. There should be one in there.
Right.
It's not required.
It's okay.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Bredenberg, and I'm from Gulfport, Florida. And my question is there a handbook? We have a lot of people that like to organize in our community. We've done some wonderful things and would love to know if there's already a handbook, because otherwise we'll probably have to write it.
I don't know. Is it Thomas? Is there a handbook for this?
So I think it's a great question. And I want to go back to the question the other gentleman asked about volunteering. Now is the time to find out where you would volunteer, not right. So it's a good idea to understand that. And the other thing I would say, especially when it comes to food, and this might not seem like it's important, but it is very important. Temperature and management of food, especially during crises, are really critical. And we want to be in a place where we are giving good, safe, healthy food to folks. And so please make sure as you're thinking about volunteering to hand out food, there's always a desire to do it by yourself and use your resources, which is a gracious act. But you want to make sure that we have food safety and consideration in all that we hand out to everybody, because every human being deserves, as we would say in our work, don't put something on someone else's table you wouldn't put on yours. The second thing is you want to volunteer with an organization that can also provide for your safety. So when we are out immediately after storms, we're making sure that our volunteers have gloves and masks, that they're in a place where traffic can get in and out. And so check all that now, right? Make sure you understand what that is. To your direct point, I think there are more and more guides available. I think when you check county resources, and Mary could probably talk about this, even when you check FEMA resources, there are more and more guides and checklists to say, do these things in advance, or here's what you should do if. I don't know that there's one Bible, but I think there's a lot of really good ideas and things that people have compiled based on their experience in their communities and in their homes. So I would suggest that a good thorough search But one of the things that we don't think about enough is our counties are incredibly important in our day-to-day lives in many ways. Probably some we take for granted, but especially in crisis, our county organizations are terrific resources. And I would always advise to start in some of those places, particularly with an area like Mary's.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I always get, excited when somebody talks about, we have so many resources in our community, so many people that want to help. And I know Gulfport is one of those, and it's one of the areas that I really want to kind of harness, and make some contacts there. I think we have a lot going on in this county, and I just we have a committee, I know, but but we have some people who are we're trying to work on how to do that, how to kind of get this network, this countywide network, but with each of the areas like Gulfport doing your thing, but then being connected to us, and then with, these other people in the county. So just trying to get that organized and writing some guides, the donations, the volunteers, just getting some basic information just to start, and then we could build on it. So if you want to be a part of that, I'll take your name after we're done here.
We are kind of at time, so it's a great question. And as we know, every storm is a little bit different. So in some ways, every Bible or every kind of guidebook to each storm is going to have slightly different nuances, but fantastic questions. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us with their insights here. We've been speaking with Matt Thorne, who lives in the Shore Acres neighborhood in St. Petersburg and who opened up a relief market and grill for his neighbors and people beyond the neighborhood after Hurricane Helene. Matt, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Also joining us tonight, Charles Gallagher, attorney with Gallagher & Associates in St. Petersburg. Charles, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Mary Burrell, whole community program lead with Pinellas County Emergency Management. Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
And Thomas Mance, president and CEO of Feeding Tampa Bay. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's our show for this week. Florida Matters executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Our engineer is Jackson Harp. Production assistants from Mary Shedden, Warren Buckholtz, Chandler Balcom, and Scott Wachtler produced the video. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch this episode on WUSF's YouTube channel. And special thanks to the Palladium Side Door Cabaret for hosting. And thanks to our wonderful audience. I'm Matthew Petty. Thank you for listening.